In this video, inspired by Eric Holt's self-discipline, the ultimate guide to achieve success in business, relationships, and life, we're going to break down the brutal truth behind discipline, what it actually takes to build it, how your mind tricks you into weakness, and how to destroy that voice that keeps saying, "I'll do it later." If you stick with me for the next 20 minutes, you'll understand the real structure of a disciplined mind. The kind of mind that doesn't need motivation, doesn't rely on mood, and doesn't wait for the right time. You'll learn how Navy SEALs, monks, and top performers create a mindset so unbreakable that even when their body screams stop, their mind whispers, "Again." Because in the end, success isn't built on talent or luck. It's built on obedience to yourself. Let's begin. Eric Holt starts his book with a simple but painful truth. Most people don't lack goals. They lack control. You already know what you want. You want to study harder, hit the gym, work on your dreams, but your mind always finds an excuse. Tomorrow will be better. I need rest. I'll start when I feel ready. Holt calls this the inner negotiation, the battle between what you want and what you feel like doing. The problem is, every time you give in to that negotiation, you train your brain to listen to comfort, and the more you listen, the weaker you become. Discipline, according to Holt, isn't about forcing yourself. It's about reprogramming that inner conversation. When your mind says, "I don't feel like doing it," discipline responds, "Do it anyway." That's the first real shift. You stop waiting for energy or motivation and start relying on execution. Holt says, discipline is doing what you must do, especially when you don't feel like it. It's simple but not easy, because your brain is wired to avoid discomfort. Psychologically, this comes from what's called the pleasure principle. Your mind always seeks comfort and avoids pain. But Holt reminds us that growth hides behind discomfort. Every rep, every cold shower, every hour of focus, it's not punishment, it's training your mind to obey. Think about this. The same brain that says 5 more minutes of sleep can also push through 10 hours of grind. The difference isn't capability, it's command. Discipline is command over self. Self-discipline starts when the argument ends, when you stop negotiating with your mind, when you decide that your goals aren't optional anymore, they're obligations. Because the moment you stop asking, "Should I do it?" and start saying, "I will do it," you've already won half the war. Once you stop negotiating with your mind, you meet the next challenge, the pain barrier. Eric Holt explains that everyone has a threshold, a point where the discomfort feels too much, and your brain screams for relief. Most people quit there. They think the pain means something's wrong. But Holt says the pain is not your enemy. It's the entry fee. It's the barrier separating the average from the unstoppable. When you wake up early and your bed feels like heaven, that resistance you feel isn't weakness. It's your mind's protection mechanism. The brain doesn't like change. It's programmed to conserve energy, to repeat what's easy and familiar. That's why discipline feels unnatural in the beginning. You're literally fighting your own wiring. But Holt gives one rule. Train the brain to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Every time you resist the urge to quit, your pain barrier expands. The mind learns that discomfort won't kill you. That's when growth begins. Holt writes, "The disciplined person doesn't chase comfort, they chase control." This is where the psychology of habits connects with self-discipline. According to behavioral psychology, every action you repeat forms a small neural loop. Cue, routine, reward. Most people get stuck chasing the reward, the dopamine hit of pleasure. But disciplined individuals flip the script. They train themselves to find reward in the routine itself, not just the outcome. They start to crave the process, not the prize. That's why athletes train in the cold, why writers sit down even when uninspired, why entrepreneurs keep going when no one claps. Because self-discipline is built in silence, in repetition, in the boring parts no one sees. Eric Holt says the biggest mistake people make is waiting for motivation. Motivation is emotion, discipline is structure. Motivation fades with mood, discipline survives mood. You don't need to feel ready, you need to act. This is how you rewire your brain. You associate pain with progress. You see resistance as a signal that you're doing something right. The brain adapts, and what once felt impossible becomes automatic. Think about this. When a soldier trains, he doesn't aim for comfort, he aims for readiness. Every drill, every repetition builds automatic obedience. That's the same principle Holt wants you to apply to life. You don't build discipline by reading about it. You build it by suffering a little every day voluntarily. You train your body and mind to act despite emotion. Because true freedom doesn't come from doing what you want. It comes from having control over yourself when you don't want to. And that's where self-discipline becomes more than a skill. It becomes your identity. The kind of identity that refuses to be controlled by mood, pain, or laziness. The kind that keeps moving forward even when no one's watching. Eric Holt says the greatest battle of discipline isn't with the outside world. It's with the invisible enemy that lives inside your own head. That voice that whispers, "You've done enough. You deserve a break. You'll start fresh tomorrow." Holt calls it the inner saboteur, the part of your mind that disguises weakness as logic. It doesn't sound lazy. It sounds reasonable. It tells you to rest because you're tired. It convinces you that skipping one day won't matter. But every time you listen to it, you reinforce a pattern of surrender. Psychologists describe this as cognitive dissonance, the mental tension that appears when your actions don't match your goals. Your mind hates inconsistency, so it tries to justify it. "I didn't have time. It wasn't the right day. I'll do double tomorrow." These are comforting lies your brain creates to protect your ego. Holt says, the disciplined person kills excuses before they take shape. He explains that every disciplined life begins with brutal self-honesty. You can't fix what you keep lying about. If you're distracted, admit it. If you're lazy, admit it. If you lack consistency, face it. Because once you tell the truth, you can start to rebuild. Self-discipline is built on clarity, not comfort. To destroy the inner enemy, Holt gives one rule: never negotiate with weakness. The moment you start reasoning with it, it wins. If you plan to wake up at 5 a.m., you wake up at 5 a.m. No debate, no delay. You move before the brain has time to talk you out of it. That small window, the few seconds between decision and hesitation, is where discipline lives. Neuroscience backs this idea. Studies show that the longer you think about a difficult task, the less likely you are to do it. The brain starts generating excuses to conserve energy. That's why Holt teaches what he calls the action-first principle. Act before your emotions interfere. Don't think, move, don't feel, execute. Action kills hesitation. He compares it to jumping into cold water. The longer you stand at the edge, the harder it gets. But once you jump, the discomfort fades and you adapt. That's how life works. Discipline gets easier only when you stop waiting for it to be easy. The inner enemy isn't destroyed in one day. It's defeated every morning when you do the thing you promised yourself you'd do. Every time you reject comfort, every time you push through resistance, that inner voice gets quieter. You don't silence it completely, you just stop listening. And that's the ultimate act of power, when your mind tries to talk you out of greatness and you move anyway. Because discipline isn't about feeling strong, it's about acting strong when you feel weak. Eric Holt says most people fail because they depend on feelings instead of systems. You wait to feel like working. You wait to feel confident, focused, inspired. But discipline doesn't wait for feelings. It creates structure that works even when you don't feel like it. Holt writes, "Motivation is a visitor, systems are home." That one line changes everything. A system is simply a pattern that removes choice. When you have a system, you don't decide every morning whether to work out or study. It's already decided. It's part of who you are. The more you reduce decisions, the more consistent you become. Because willpower is limited, it drains every time you rely on it. Holt explains that the most disciplined people in the world don't wake up motivated every day. They just design their lives so that action becomes automatic. Psychologists call this implementation intention, a mental commitment that links behavior with a cue. For example, when it's 7 a.m., I train. When I finish lunch, I write. Over time, the mind learns to associate the cue with the task. You don't think, you execute. It's the same reason soldiers, monks, and athletes thrive. Their days run on rhythm, not emotion. Holt also emphasizes environment design. You can't expect discipline in a chaotic environment. If your room is cluttered, your mind will be too. If your phone is full of distractions, your focus won't survive. Discipline grows in structure. Remove temptation. Simplify choices. Create friction between you and your weakness. If you want to stop wasting time, make wasting time harder. Delete the apps. Set clear rules. Holt calls this discipline engineering, shaping your surroundings to match your goals. And here's the part most people ignore. Discipline is less about intensity and more about consistency. Anyone can go hard for a day. Few can show up every day. Holt says consistency builds identity. When you repeat a behavior long enough, it stops being something you do and becomes something you are. That's when discipline transforms into self-respect. There's also a deep psychological reason behind this. The brain craves identity consistency. It wants your actions to align with who you believe you are. If you start telling yourself, "I'm the kind of person who finishes what he starts," the mind begins to resist quitting. The opposite is also true. If you see yourself as lazy, your brain will subconsciously look for proof to confirm it. Holt insists that identity is not something you find. It's something you create through repeated disciplined action. This is how you win the war of discipline, not by hype, not by bursts of effort, but by quiet repetition. Every structured day strengthens the system. Every completed task reinforces belief. Every morning you obey the schedule, you rebuild yourself from the ground up. Because in the end, self-discipline isn't about chasing perfection. It's about creating order powerful enough to carry you through chaos. The difference between successful people and everyone else is simple. They trade what they want now for what they want most. That's the core of discipline, delayed gratification. Most people lose because they confuse pleasure with progress. They scroll, rest, and consume comfort because it gives them a temporary hit of satisfaction. But Holt makes it clear. Every time you choose instant pleasure, you rob your future self of power. You're trading long-term strength for short-term relief. The mind loves instant rewards. It's wired for it. Psychologists call this the dopamine loop. When you do something pleasurable, your brain releases dopamine and you crave it again. The problem is modern life gives dopamine too easily. From likes, notifications, junk food, or shortcuts. Holt says discipline starts when you break that loop, when you teach your brain to find joy in the wait, not in the immediate win. He uses the example of investors versus gamblers. Gamblers chase the thrill of now. Investors play the game of patience. The gambler wants excitement. The investor wants results. Discipline is the mindset of an investor. You plant seeds today for a harvest you might see months later. That's how real growth works. And the best way to build delayed gratification is through controlled suffering. Do things that stretch your patience. If you want to eat, wait 30 more minutes. If you want to rest, do one more task first. Every time you resist an impulse, you teach your mind that you're in control. Every moment of restraint is a moment of power earned. The science backs it up. In the famous Stanford marshmallow experiment, children who could wait for one marshmallow to get two later ended up more successful as adults. Their ability to delay gratification predicted better self-control, higher achievements, and stronger mental health. Holt explains that the same mechanism applies to all areas of life, whether it's saving money, building a body, or chasing a dream. Those who can delay pleasure master their destiny. Holt also warns about reward addiction. When you constantly seek pleasure, your threshold for satisfaction rises. You need more to feel less. But when you practice restraint, the opposite happens. Small things start feeling rewarding again. A quiet morning, a productive day, a moment of peace. Discipline makes you sensitive to progress. The truth is, most people aren't addicted to failure. They're addicted to comfort. The moment you start breaking that addiction, you start becoming unstoppable. Because once you realize you can survive discomfort, no temptation has power over you anymore. That's the ultimate trait of discipline. Giving up what's easy now for what's eternal later. The world belongs to those who can wait, work, and endure. Eric Holt explains that self-discipline isn't just a habit, it's a loop, a continuous cycle of effort, reward, and identity. You start by forcing yourself to take action even when it feels unnatural. Over time, that forced action creates results. Those results change the way you see yourself, and that new self-image fuels even greater discipline. It's a loop, one that keeps getting stronger if you keep it alive. Holt says, discipline is built through repetition, but it's sustained through pride. The first few days of any new habit are brutal because your mind doesn't yet believe you're capable of consistency. But once you start keeping promises to yourself, something shifts. You begin to trust your own word. That's when discipline turns from an obligation into a personal code. You don't do it because you have to. You do it because it's who you are. This is what psychologists call self-concept reinforcement. Every completed task becomes evidence of the identity you're trying to build. If you tell yourself, I'm disciplined, and then you act accordingly, your brain locks that identity in. But if you break your word, your confidence collapses. Holt reminds us that every small betrayal of self weakens the foundation of discipline. That's why the smallest habits matter. He says, if you want to be unshakable, stop making promises you don't intend to keep. That means no half commitments, no emotional decisions, no sudden changes because of mood. Discipline doesn't depend on motivation, it depends on integrity. When you say you'll do something, you do it. The reason this loop is so powerful is because it turns effort into automatic behavior. Once your identity is tied to being disciplined, skipping the task feels wrong. Just like brushing your teeth, you don't need motivation for it anymore. It's part of you. That's how elite performers operate. They don't rely on energy or emotion, they rely on identity. Eric Holt explains that the fastest way to strengthen this loop is by focusing on small wins, not giant leaps, not dramatic goals. Small, consistent victories. When you finish your workout, study when you said you would, or resist an urge, you send a message to your subconscious. I'm in control. That message compounds. It becomes your truth. Discipline doesn't make life easier, it makes you stronger. And when you're strong enough to handle the hard things, life stops being about avoiding pain and starts being about creating power. Holt's philosophy is simple. If you master yourself, you can master anything. Because when discipline becomes who you are, there's no longer a choice between easy and hard. There's only one option. Do what's required. Eric Holt ends his book with a message that feels less like advice and more like a command. Stop waiting to feel ready. Life doesn't reward intentions. It rewards execution. The only people who move forward are those who act before they feel prepared. Because readiness is a myth. You don't become confident before you start. You start and confidence follows. Holt says self-discipline is the foundation of all freedom. Most people think discipline restricts you, but it's the opposite. A disciplined person can do what others can't. Wake up when it's hard, focus when it's noisy, and push when everyone else quits. Freedom without discipline is chaos. Discipline without freedom is slavery. But when you merge both, you become unstoppable. He explains that self-discipline is not about perfection. It's about dominion. Dominion over your impulses, your emotions, your habits, and your reactions. Every time you choose control over chaos, you strengthen your dominion. You stop being a slave to moods, desires, and distractions. Holt writes, "The man who controls himself controls everything around him." That's the true essence of power. There's a deeper psychological truth behind this. Your brain constantly looks for safety. It wants predictable pleasure and minimal pain. But discipline teaches it that safety isn't in comfort. It's in control. You create safety by mastering yourself. You create peace by obeying your principles, not your emotions. The disciplined mind doesn't panic when things go wrong. It adapts. It doesn't react to problems, it solves them. Because it's built on a code that never changes no matter how unstable the world gets. Holt calls this state mental armor. Once you've trained your mind to act on command, nothing outside you has power anymore. Think about it. The undisciplined person lives in constant internal chaos. They want to change but don't follow through. They feel guilty, make promises, break them again, and repeat the cycle. But the disciplined one lives with inner peace, even in struggle. They don't need external motivation because they've learned to be their own commander, and that's what Holt truly wants his readers to understand. Self-discipline isn't a technique, it's a transformation. It's a complete rewiring of how you think, how you act, and how you value yourself. Once you stop living by comfort and start living by principle, the world bends differently for you. When you wake up tired but still show up. When you fail but still stay consistent. When you feel fear but still take the next step. That's when discipline turns into power. Eric Holt says it best. Discipline is doing what must be done, even when no one is watching, even when everything in you wants to stop. And that's how you become unbreakable, not because life got easier, but because you did.